So that's maybe what makes the summer culture so great over there, because everyone saves up their energy for summer. Yeah. Like in California, like everyone's always going out at the time. Sometimes people want to do something, sometimes they don't. Yeah. But I can, this whole like huge, big summer culture is like so interesting to me. Even here in DC, but I can definitely see it more over there.
you want us in any order? I don't know. Just a
Moderator preference for
preference of order. How people are seated. Speakers.
So we're going to have you sit right here, and then it's up to your preference how you would like the rest of the speakers seated on stage.
Do you want
You have
us
a
to sit in
specific
order?
question order that you would
No, I
like?
don't have a good job, but I'm a general to come from men, women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, then Ambassador Y'all will have you start here at the podium.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you join us up here on stage. Thank you.
I saw her. I knew this. She sent me. She sent me the. I thought her article. And it's like I told you, there's no way I can say that without getting in trouble. But it was good to see it. It was good. Awful.
Karine ici, c'est bon? And the mic.
Rama,
Yeah.
James here is going to be your stage.
Oh, okay.
He will give you the cue when you hear the music. He will count you down.
Okay.
And you're going to look at this camera right here. Feel free to keep the conversation here on stage, amongst each other. And you will also be able to see our virtual speakers right here.
Okay.
So you don't have to turn over your shoulders to look at the screen. You can see him right here, like he's a part of the conversation.
Okay. Careful. It seems like it's very intimate, but people will listen from. I'm always like I'm home. I make myself like home, and then people are listening. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, it's a pleasure to welcome you today, today's discussion, Security Challenges and Path to Stability in the Sahel. We are especially honored to co-host this important conversation with our long-standing partner at the Policy Center for the New South, an institution brilliantly led by Karim Al-Ainawi and has consistently brought African perspectives and strategic insight to some of the continent's most pressing challenges. I also want to warmly welcome those tuning in online from across the United States, Africa, Europe, and beyond. The Sahel stands today as at a defining crossroads. Across the region, we continue to witness a convergence of crises: insecurity, political instability, humanitarian emergencies, climate stress, food insecurity, and economic fragility. The Sahel now counts for more than half of global terrorism-related victims' deaths. At the same time, military-led governments are facing increasing pressure from jihadist and separatist groups, while citizens continue to demand security, dignity, economic opportunity. The urgency of this discussion has been underscored by the recent wave of coordinated attacks in Mali in recent weeks. Armed groups linked to Jama al-Nasrullah al-Islam, while Muslimin and Jinim, along separatist fractions, launched unprecedented assaults across several Malian cities. These attacks reportedly targeted military installations and senior government officials. The defense minister was killed, revealing both the growing operational sophistication of extremist groups and the fragility of the current security landscape in these countries. Amid these uncertainties, one point remains clear. Durable stability in the Sahel cannot come from military responses alone. Security and development are inseparable. Lasting peace requires stronger institutions, local legitimacy, economic inclusion, regional cooperation. African voices and African-led solutions must remain at the center of any sustainable path forward. This conversation is particularly timely as the Atlantic Council Africa Center and the Policy Center for the New South continue to deepen their collaboration on the future of the Sahel and broader African security and governance challenges. A joint report is underway, authored by Sarah Daly, Abdelak Bassou, and Rida Liamouri. And speaking of Rida, we are fortunate today to be joined by an outstanding group of experts who bring deep regional knowledge and practical policy experience. We are delighted to welcome then Rida Liamouri, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, who is joining us online, whose research and analysis on North Africa and the Sahel have helped shape important policy conversations internationally. We are pleased to welcome to Karin Kaneza Nantulia, Deputy Director, Africa Director at Human Rights Watch, whose work has consistently highlighted the human dimension of governance and security challenges across Africa. We are also joined by Moussa Kondo, Executive Director of the Sahel Institute for Democracy and Governance, who brings valuable expertise on governance, democratic resilience, and local dynamics in the Sahel. We are equally pleased to welcome Mike Jobin, Civil Society Chair at Mali Affinity Group, whose extensive experience in peace building and conflict resolution across Africa has contributed to innovative approaches to community resilience and stabilization. And joining us as well is Andrea Walter-Puri, an independent policy advisor specializing in international security assistance and governance issues in fragile and conflict-affected environments, and governments too. Moderating today's discussion is Joseph Sani, former Vice President for Africa at the United States Institute of Peace and a respected voice on conflict prevention, governance, and peace building across the continent. We are grateful to him for guiding today's exchange. Thank you all again for joining us. We look forward to a thoughtful and substantive conversation on one of the most consequential regions for Africa and for international security more broadly. With that, let me turn over to our moderator, Dr. Joseph Sani.
Thank you, Ambassador Yat. Thank you for having us. Thank you, the Africa Center here at Atlantic Council for hosting us, and the Policy Center for the New South for having us as well. We, as you said, I will not present our panelists, but you set the stage very well for a very relevant and powerful conversation, and we are well pleased to have these experts share. They promise to shed some light. It's a complex topic, but they promise to shed some light and provide us with some insights on this particular issue. So the conversation I will try as much as I can to target 2 points, main point. Understanding the current dynamics in the Sahel today and the implication for the region and for the world, frankly. And also try to explore with our panelists the prospects, some options for durable peace and stability in the region. And we know, thank you for joining us online. We will try as much as we can, given the time we have, to engage with you, the audience. So please feel free to, if you have questions, just don't wait the end of our conversation here. We will take the questions as they come, when they are relevant to the topic. So please be ready, use that chat box whenever you can as we move forward with the conversation. I will then start with the first questions to Moussa Kondo. You are from the region, you have lived, worked in Mali at various positions in the government. But when you look at what happened on April 25th, what's your read in terms of what does that mean? Is it a new shift? Is it a shift in the dynamics of the conflict? What does that mean in terms of the balance of powers and the actors in Mali and in the Sahel overall?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, and thanks to Atlantic Council for having us here to have this conversation, which is very important to, like, every single time we have a spotlight on Sahel is very important so people know what's going on and how things are happening. So now Sahel, not just Mali, but the broader Sahel region is, I would not say victim, but also paying a tribute of something the rest of the world seems like forgotten. Like, let Sahel things happening without having a kind of understanding of what's happening. So this kind of platforms is very important for us. So we remember the latest instability of the Sahel region started in not go by far, but 2012, when the first major attack happening in Aguelhok with at that time terrorists and jihadist group and supported by MNLA, but this time the Tuareg rebel independentist groups. And since then, the instability taking rooted in different areas from the northern regions to come down the center, the three borders country, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and now the southern and the western regions of Mali. And I said earlier, it's not only Sahel problems, because now we see how it's happening in coastal countries like Benin. Even this morning, we say Jenim control some position of the Benin army, and also the attempt of attack in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, in Cote d'Ivoire, just to say, not just focusing on Sahel, but also the neighboring countries of the Sahel regions, what we cannot exclude Mauritania and Algeria. So these are key players. Anything we need to build or want to build in the Sahel or for Sahel, these different actors or stakeholders need to be part of the conversation.
Thank you for raising the Morocco, Algeria, and recognizing the regional implication of the conflict. But generally, when we look at it, we look at the coastal West Africa countries, right? The Benin, you mentioned, the Cote d'Ivoire, even Senegal, right? But we forget that there is also a north from the Sahel. So the Algerian and Morocco, and to some extent Turkey and even Gulf states. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are observing not only a security deadlock, frankly, but also some sort of geopolitical rearrangement of the region. And this is a good segue to my friend Rida. Rida, what do you make? Try to help us understand the implication in the north, right? The implication on the relationship between the Sahel, Morocco, Algeria, Turkey, the Gulf states. What's your read? You're on mute. Can we unmute him, please? While we are fixing that technical issue, I will segue directly, because it seems the same questions. I will go back, Mike, to you, because yes, there is a security issue. We've seen it, but people tend to use security as an euphemism, because at the end of the day, people are suffering. We have victims, we have citizens. And what's your read of how the security situation or the situation in the Sahel has affected the relationship between citizens and their government, between communities?
Thanks a lot, Joseph. For those who don't know, I've spent a lot of time in this region with Search for Common Ground, a leading peace-building organization. And I'm also involved in the Mali Affinity Group, which aims to build ties between the American and Malian people. And maybe three things that I see in this moment, maybe three lessons as we look at the spikes and dips in attention to this region paid here in Washington, where we're sitting today. One is, just like you were saying, Joseph, and I think as you, Musa, were pointing out, there is no peace without people. And it's really easy, particularly when there is a spike in attention, to focus on security cooperation, to focus on quick political deal-making that may or may not come to pass. But this is a crisis that has been brewing for 15 plus years. There's deep origins, and one that's metastasized. There's economies of violence that have sprung up. There's cycles of vengeance that have been played into by armed actors. And without putting those kinds of demons back into the bottle, those kinds of genies back into the bottle, it's very hard to see how a signature on a piece of paper can advance without people behind it. So I think that's one of the key points. There's no peace without people. The second is these are long-term issues. Right now, across the Sahel, about 1 in 4 children is stunted by hunger. And in an era where the US is cutting food assistance, an era where families are struggling on what kind of future they're building for their kids, it's really difficult to imagine a wider peace process, a wider political process, and real substantial change without taking into account the basic needs that families feel across the region. And then finally, I'm sure we'll talk at some point about drones and AI and all this technology. But this region, like every society, is undergoing a really radical transformation in terms of how it intersects with technology, how it intersects with climate, how it fits into the wider world. And ignoring the role of Malians, Nigerians, Burkinabe as stakeholders in a humanity that's changing itself in how we deal with and manage our societies, and putting that aside and only focusing on political and security relegates in many ways one of the youngest region in the world to a different status, when actually they're a key part of all of these global conversations. And we can't limit our Sahel conversation to only humanitarian, security, political, as important as that may be.
Thanks. And then just to say people make peace, I remember when I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace, we used to say, leaders sign peace treaties, but only people make peace. And talking of people, and Karine, I'm turning to you because yes, there is violence, and it's important to focus on security, etc. But can you tell us a little bit more? Mike spoke about hunger, the need, shelter, just the basic needs. But then we also have political rights, human rights. Can you tell us a little bit more about the situation of those rights in the Sahel today?
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks for moderating this conversation. I think there are about three things one has to keep in mind. One is, yes, we're talking about human rights, we're talking about civil and political rights, but this is in the context of an ongoing armed conflict between a state or states and armed Islamist groups. And how does that look like? I think one, you have, obviously, as our reports show very clearly, in the last several years, the human rights situation has deteriorated significantly across the Sahel. We have documented arbitrary arrest, unlawful killings, murders, burning of property, looting of property, war crimes, ethnic cleansing. So you have a situation where citizens are suffering in the hands of both, it's important to say, the state, but also armed Islamist groups. Now, you take that and then you add another trend where critics, opponents, journalists, independent media groups are unable to operate, or when they operate, it's under a lot of scrutiny and repression, because the states have radicalized, are increasingly radical, and are framing criticism as undermining national security. So that's the second trend. The other trend that's important to keep in mind is that you have countries where the presence of the state presence is not there. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that you have a lack of trust. You have citizens who have local grievances against the state because of corruption, because of, as my co-panelists have said, the lack of economic opportunities, which then the armed Islamist groups will leverage and present themselves through intimidation, forceful recruitment, as the alternative authority. So civilian protection in the context of the Sahel is not separate from national security. It is part and parcel of it. It's very important to see the adherence to international human rights and international humanitarian law as part of what a national security strategy should look like, and focus on.
Yes. Some may say a human-centered security approach, right, where citizens are at the heart of security strategies, not just institutions, not just buildings, but actually citizens. I will go back to Rida again. Please, Rida, as we are having this conversation, I'm just curious from where you stand, where you are actually, Morocco. What's your take in terms of the impact this new shift in the dynamics of instability in the Sahel has in Morocco, Algeria, or how it is seen from Morocco, Algeria, the Gulf states, Turkey, who are the new players in that space?
Oh, no.
Have not solved it yet. I apologize again, Rita. We still have technical issues. But we come back to this, we will come back to it because an important point I want us to have in this conversation. And Andrea, the same thing, not from that locale, but I know based on your experience, you have worked a lot analyzing, advising, interventions to support stability in the Sahel, right? You have worked with the US, the State Department, for example, to support some of the trainings, security, not intervention, but security support, so to speak. So do you think, and then today, in some quarters, people, they have heard criticism of previous paradigm of security cooperation and supports. Did we fail?
Well, I would say we're at a real point of reckoning, okay? And to understand the situation, we really have to go back to the post 9/11 environment because the US and France, but the US predominantly had a very, very CT-focused approach. And with that focus on counterterrorism, building partner capacity, there was majority a train and equip approach. And there were a lot of unintended consequences that came from that led us to what the crisis in 2012 and then other international interventions beyond. So there was, with that train and equip approach, unintended consequences included strengthening Praetorian Guard, over-indexing on military over law enforcement agencies, eroding civilian oversight of the security sector, contributing to government corruption, eroding principles of civilian supremacy, and encouraging rent-seeking behavior. Predominantly, I'm talking about in Mali, but throughout the Sahel writ large. We have the crisis in 2012. We have the entrance of a dramatically broadened international community that comes in. But the focus and the lens is still counterterrorism. It's still building partner capacity. And while there is an increased focus on also defense institutional reform, looking at issues of logistics, finance, trying to strengthen civilian confidence in security institutions, that still fails and leads us to the coups, the more recent coups. What this taught us was that obviously military cooperation alone cannot compensate for weak political legitimacy. But right now, we're at a very big reckoning point. The entire Western community has been pushed out, has exited, and we have a very new, different model with the entrance of Russia, with the entrance of other new international partners. And we've gone from a advise, assist, and accompany model to really combat-enabled regime preservation. And this brings us to a very, very different environment where, yes, there may be tactical advances that the countries and the regimes are now benefiting from with the advent of Russian support, but the challenges we are seeing locally, the impact on civilians from both, as my colleagues described, from the extremist groups and from security forces has been devastating.
Thanks. Musa, just to build on what Andrea was saying, so back in the days when those kind of, that cooperation, that military cooperation was going on, security, we had MINUSMA, we have the G5 Sahel, etc. Did we see that coming? Did we see the imbalance? Did we see where voices, where criticism made to warn people that this was a wrong approach? Was there any opposition to that model? Because it seems the model was there for 10, 15 years and nobody raised a finger. Now, hindsight is always 2020. But what happened then? You were in the system.
Yeah, I would say like 100% it worked, but you didn't realize how it was working till now. Because she said something very important, from assistance, training and equipment to combat cooperations, things completely changed. The ones who made the coups in our countries are the ones who've been trained by these programs to become the elite in the army. But being the elite, they were supposed to guarantee the republic, to support, make sure institution functions. But instead of that, they overthrown the government, not just in Mali. That's one thing we should really think about it. And now the second thing,
But they overthrew a government most citizens thought was corrupt, right? So just
no, that's the second aspect I would talk about. She mentioned that's what at the point I was focusing on, the security and the military training and equipment aspect. The second thing, this is the massive corruption of the political elite. So that's one of the reasons. Even when the coup happened in Mali, it was not the beginning. It was not a coup. It was like a massive civilian protest. And even that, what I used to say, when the protest was like in the highest, in the peakest point, even the international community, through the mediator, Goodluck Jonathan, who did a tremendous job in Mali, noticed that some of the parliamentary have not been elected. They were barely nominated, appointed. That was the problem. But we didn't see a lot of emphasis from the international community to say, we are the democratic communities. These are things happening in the democratic countries. What can we do? Instead, we got to this point. And even now, when the coup happened, we see all the problems within even the ECOWAS in terms of democratic governance, political aspect, and African Union. And now the questions start raising, like, we need reform inside those institutions. So that means our region being not just victim of the weakening of the governance and democratic aspect, but also the military just jumped in the game and took over the power. And now the new approach of military cooperation changed completely dynamic in the directions. Instead, training, equipping, and thing. But now we have a group we paid to protect and also to combat. And those groups are known is like who pays the most. They, as the President Putin said, one of the questions say, these are business companies. You pay more, they will provide more services.
I see Andrea wants to jump in quickly.
I just want to cat on
Do we have
onto
Ida?
this.
Hola. Just so. Okay, please, Andrea.
Just that the prior model of that Western interventions that we're talking about was that improved military capacity would mean stabilized governments.
Yes.
And we saw very clearly that that was not the case.
Correct.
And one of the reasons was the fact that if you identify all your logistics, then you know where it is, and you can't potentially sell it and have gains from it. If you fix, financial virement on a weekly basis so that soldiers are actually getting paid to their bank accounts, you cannot take money off the top and line leaders' pockets. So there were internal strategic resistance to the type of reform that was needed to have more defense sector reform writ large. So while some of these programs did have tactical advances that were very successful on the battlefield, they didn't do anything to stop the protest because the soldiers were not being resupplied. There was no food, there were no arms, and soldiers were dying on the battlefield. So you can't have approaches that only are the tip of the spear and strengthen tactically on the ground without having a security sector that can support it.
So yes, it is not easy, but to criticize and say, so what went wrong, etc. So I will try to change gears here and try to see what's next for the Sahel, right? What should we do? What options are available? We have discussed security sector, but I will come back to the citizens. So, Karine, if you had a magic wand, what will you suggest should happen to ensure that human rights, political rights are part of the security response? What will you do?
I think it comes down to two things. One is to sustain the resilience, not just of civil society groups, but the communities writ large, and how can that be done? And the second one is really to start what some of us call just having some atrocity prevention mechanisms being rooted in. Because the more you have cycles of abuses and violence, they feed into each other. They provide a great narrative for abusive armed Islamist groups to keep recruiting. And as the other speaker said, it doesn't really help even the militaristic approach. I think when it comes to the immediate to medium term, I think I would say three things. One, but before I even say that, I think it's important that we recognize that within the region, at the regional level, the African Union, from the sweeping sanctions that they had, they've been trying to engage with this AES countries in an indirect but consistent way, through mediators like Faure Gnassingbé, the president of Togo, through attending some of the Sahel summits at the UN, and because of that inclination, or rather some of the political will that we see, which obviously is because sanctions have not been necessarily positive. The countries have been more radicalized, the populations are the one hurting, and ECOWAS and the African Union have lost leverage. In light of that, I get to my conclusion. One, look at individual countries and really have best practices. What kind of training? We've been talking about training. It's important that countries like Ghana, Togo, Benin, Mauritania, and others show how they've been able to handle, including Nigeria to a certain extent, what are the lessons learned from a technical perspective, but also from a practice policy perspective. The relationship between community leaders, civil society groups, and the government. Some of these countries have success stories to share. What are those success stories? How can we document them? So that's one. The other one is really to, and that's something that can be done immediately. How can we provide support for organizations and groups that are not necessarily documenting civil and political rights violations, but that are engaged on education, humanitarian assistance, health, right? And there are local groups engaged on that, which, whose operations have been very significantly affected by the US budget cuts and other restrictions. This is something that can be done. And finally, the media that is in exile, journalists who are in exile, who keep an eye on their countries because they're from those countries. We're sitting here, we're talking, but at the end of the day, the work that these journalists, whistleblowers, have done is amazing. To support them as where they are, is something that is in my view, in the view of my organization, of a top priority. Thanks.
And Mike, I know she keep mentioning lesson learned. I know that Search for Common Ground, this organization like the U.S. Institute of Peace, have led with this type of issues elsewhere. Right? I mean, whether it is in the Philippines, for example, where Nigeria, where Search for Common Ground has a robust program. What lessons can be transferred and are relevant for this moment that the Sahel is going through today?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the only lesson from abroad that I'd point to is that conflicts like this can end, and people can bring them to an end. Beyond that, I think there's a lot of lessons that can be drawn from within the Sahel itself, and there's nothing going wrong that can't be fixed with what's going right in the region, as daunting as it seems today. For example, looking at some of the response to the Boko Haram crisis out in Difa in Niger, as well as in Maiduguri in Nigeria, the Nigerian government partnered with civil society, including Search for Common Ground, with the UN, to support awareness raising among Boko Haram combatants. 3/4 of Boko Haram combatants listened to the radio programs, and the majority of those who defected, surrendered, or were captured on the battlefield said it led to their decisions voluntarily to leave the group. The fact is, even people affiliated with armed groups have agency. Every day wake up deciding whether or not they join, whether they stay. Everyone who pays taxes decides whether they pay or not, often under extreme duress. but there is nonetheless agency. And so one is just that focus on agency and the choices, particularly of young people, particularly of women. Today, Search for Common Ground produces a radio show called Youth Talk. It's a youth investigative journalism show across Mali as well as other countries. It has 5 million listeners, and it's aimed at helping some of the youngest people in one of the youngest societies shape what they want their country to be. Another example, Karine was talking about early warning systems, and atrocities prevention, and there are some mechanisms in this region that are working fairly well to signal, to trigger emergency mediation, to detect, respond either from a security side or from a civilian side to prevent conflicts between communities, often again led by women, by young people, and with strong buy-in from the authorities. And maybe the third thing that I would say, the biggest lesson is the international community really should be thinking over a 5 or a 10-year timetable. That's the US, that's our colleagues in middle powers, that's in the region. But we really need a concerted focus on partnerships with these countries, and particularly with the people in these countries, to bring this succession of crises to an end. In short-term thinking, if you look at the US strategy that was published, the report to Congress was published earlier this month, was limited security assistance, some health assistance, and that's about it. And that's not necessarily a cohesive strategy in the service either of the American taxpayer or of the people who live in this region and day-to-day work for peace, work for a better future for them and their kids, but at the same time need the accompaniment of the wider world to get there.
Thank you. I mean, when you speak of Search for Common Ground programs in Nigeria and elsewhere, I think of our own program, the U.S. Institute of Peace Women Program in Mali, in Niger, and in Burkina Faso, and how women demonstrated agency and courage to go in places where no one will go and engage with some of the jihadist groups just to make sure that their children can sleep safely. Unfortunately, although that infrastructure has been dismantled, unfortunately, by this administration, basically. So speaking of, but you said also something. You said engaging with the people of the region. I don't know if it was a lapsus, as we say in French, because you didn't say the government. So I'm just wondering, Moussa, with the talk of sovereignty, le souverainisme, as they say, la politique de souverainisme, etc., how can we, the international community and partners, engage constructively with the governments of the region? Are they willing to listen? And how? Because we know that they have made some strategy realignment, Russia and some other powers. How can the West, how can other countries in the region, like I think of Côte d'Ivoire, Benin. I saw last week that the Prime Minister of Niger, Prime Minister Zayn, went to the inauguration of the new president of Benin, which I thought is a good sign. But how can, in a nutshell, how can countries of the region engage constructively with the governments of the three countries, basically, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali?
Yeah. This is a good question because I recently said in one of my conversations, like, people in the Sahel need more solidarity, and we cannot call it solidarity as part of interference. I think the sovereignty approach has been built especially against the French politics in Francophone Africa, and especially in the Sahel. And this was very clear, and they made it known to the French government in a time when things got really started getting poor. And this sovereignty thing, every single country needed. At the point, another country cannot intervene in your internal affairs on how you build your government or how someone should be president or not. This is something to be very clear. When I say the sovereignty is not something started like we should take this as words, doesn't work. Today we have Russians working in Mali. It doesn't make Mali like they decide who work with. But now, moving forward for me is, even now the French government, President Macron made it very clear how they want to interact with every single country. I think this is one also message very important on the French side toward the partners. When you remember the call of Paul The message was very, you don't need to be a government in Africa to feel, hurted a little bit. So moving forward in building this new partnership with everyone locally, because the problem is not even outside partners. The problems in the Sahel and in our country today is with local actors and local stakeholders. In that point, we cannot talk about international interference. You see all the leaders in Mali today, it should be political leaders, it should be religious leaders. They are otherwise in prison or in exile. So you cannot build any kind of constructive dialogue or constructive peace building, peace initiative, stability with having everyone out of the conversation. And for me, one of the most important things is how to build sincere, honest conversation inside Mali between Malians themselves. First. Secondly, between Mali and the Malian direct neighbors. Because earlier we had this conversation with Algeria. Of course, we're not the best friends with Algeria, but we can also not deny the role Algeria can play in the conflicts happening in Mali. It could be positive or negative, and they have the means to do both, right? And I always say we should always prefer a bad peace we have on hands than prefer a good war we can take. What we decide. And now something you said, mentioning, people are suffering, and this is real. Bamako is blockaded. This is not, I love the juntas or I don't love. This is a reality. This is the fact. People cannot even, Tabaski is very important in Malian culture. And today, and we celebrate, I even don't imagine myself celebrating Tabaski in Bamako. Always go to the village and celebrate it with parents, with families. But today, people cannot go because the blockade is real. So that's the thing I want to say. And also the second thing is we cannot solve the problem with the only military approach. It has never worked. And we have the opportunity today to create stability, create more work, because without stability, there is no any economic, environment happening. And all these young people, you mentioned Boko Haram, but in Jenim, we had more than 70% of the young people engaged in this group. They even don't know why they're getting engaged. They come for logistics, they come for, such kind of thing, and they start getting great and fight for their own interests. And even not knowing what is the final objective of Jenim. In the beginning, it was a religious aspect, but now they even tend to get confidence and talk about politics. Say, Russia, you go out, and then we will work with you after the military will leave. So that means even Jenim are shifting their vision and moving forward. So that means economic support and also investment, because we do have critical minerals in our region. And that's a message even for the US government, not just say the other ones are investing in the region to get critical minerals. Why not get a stamp, a presence on that line? And creating wealth will get more jobs for young people, and then will break the channel of recruitment, massive recruitment to these armed groups.
But that, for people to invest, there must be stability, and that goes through inclusive governance and engaging with different layers, right? So, but before I get to, you have a two fingers, so please, go ahead.
Two fingers, very quickly. I just wanted to make 2 points. One on the sovereignty argument, which, as Moussa said, really it was framed around an anti-French sentiment. But it's also to avoid scrutiny and accountability. It's very important to remember that. And which is quite ironic. I always say that Mali is also the country of Sundiata Keita, who's really the godfather of the earliest version of human rights in the world. So, but there's this whole sovereignty argument that is built around, yes, anti-French, anti-intervention, but also anti-human rights, as if human rights is a foreign construct. And I think it's very important that, and there are more and more voices that counter that. The other point is, when we talk about how to engage with the leadership of these countries, or rather, how can citizens get solidarity? It's important to remember that these citizens have their own agency, and they're very active in different spaces. In Banjul, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. In Arusha with the African Court, as we speak right now. In April, So not long ago, a regional organization, the Pan-African Lawyers Union, has actually asked the African Court for an advisory opinion on whether the mass human rights violations oblige states that are parties to the African Charter to prosecute and investigate them as international crimes. And if you know that there's an accountability gap in the Sahel, then that's an avenue for Sahelian communities to really address some of these issues. And finally, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has about between 600, if not more. Last I checked, I think there were about 800 organizations that have observer status. That's a place every year in Banjul or elsewhere, often in Banjul, where you have hundreds of NGOs, civil society groups that meet and interact and strategize. And the Sahel is part of those discussions. So yeah, that's one.
Thanks. Andrea, what should we do differently?
I mean, any approach that relies predominantly on military and security without civilian accountability, without repairing civilian confidence in their government is going to once again fail. So if we look at the AES, there are certain elements of localized joint border information sharing, of cross-border coordination that we can point to at a very local level that is having some successes, but community-informed early warning systems and stronger civilian oversight of these security actors is necessary, but with these current administration and regimes, very unlikely.
So I don't know if we are getting the questions directly, but I still have more questions. So Musa, you raised the issue of, I think it seems to be at the heart of your response, there was the idea that those governments will have to engage, whether it is with Malian or Burkinabe, from within. You have to bring everybody. You can't engage, try to solve the problem by jailing everyone. You can't jail your way out of this issue. But there is one question that comes all the time. Should they be engaging and dialoguing or negotiating with terrorists?
You know,
or people we call terrorists?
I recently was in a graduation ceremony at Emirates College, and the president nicely defined in a speech a definition of democracy. What he said, it is thinking independently together, which means, and it fits so well in the context of Sahel region today, because when you look at the beginning, the first weeks and months of the coup in Mali, international, when you say it was like an open boulevard to the military. Mm-hmm. And it was the case because people thought we need something new. But how to define and design this new approach of governance we wanted from the very corrupt, from some political officials we used to have. And even not political, military. She mentioned something. One of the report from the UN targeted the head of intelligence service in Mali, General Jawara, in the time of involving in cocaine business in Mali. That was a fact. And this report didn't come from me. So we had a very moral and ethical issues this the military brought when they arrived. But the fact that seeing everyone as an enemy is also part of the way you come to power. And that's why some of the regions, they organize quick elections and get out of this cycle of coup after coup after coup after coup. And now, independently organizing this is getting people part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. Today, why you see FLA, the Tuareg Independence Group, and Jenim creating a coalition, we all know this coalition will not last longer because they don't have the same objectives. They don't have the same goals. They don't have the same basement. They don't have the same need. We know the Tuaregs will never taking control of Bamako. No. But they realize this is one moment we need to be together against one single enemy, which is the authorities in Bamako.
So to come back to my question, should the authorities in Bamako negotiate with Jenim?
I would not say negotiate with Jenim, but when you say even Jenim, the political actors and the religious actors, is not like a black or white. You have some who are very extremist, and you have some very extreme on the other hand. The ones who want to come and not involved in massive human right atrocity and abuse it, why should not discuss with them? And we know some of them very moderate. For example, I give you the example of Imam Diko. Imam Diko been one of the biggest moral authorities and ethical authorities in Bamako during the M5 RFP period. And he went to exile in Algeria. Why? Do we have something from the justice side say Imam did this, that's why he cannot come back home? No. For me, these are points, justice is not looking after him. And something is very clear. We should, sometimes I would not say equal. I may not love you, but if we have to build something together for the sake of the nation, I think it's bigger than any kind of other emotions we can feel.
Mike, before I get to Mike, I think in your work with Search, you have examples or experience of this, of some of the dialogues and negotiations between warring factions. Let's put it that way. Do you see any opening here in the Sahel where dialogue can be a constructive tool?
Yeah, I think dialogue within the Sahel, as well as dialogue between the Sahel and its partners in the wider world, are absolutely essential. You asked earlier, you alluded to why I kept focusing on the people. And the relationship between the US and Mali goes back to the age of Thomas Jefferson. Political leaders, government leaders come and go. Benjamin Banneker, after one of the city heroes in Washington, D.C., is a descendant of the Malian Empire, helped plan our own city here in Washington. And it's important, I think, to look at a longer and centuries or even just a generational timetable to think about what we're building together. And certainly governments are part of the solution, political parties are part of the solution, but it's also, as Musa was saying, it's about business to business ties, it's about civil society to civil society, academics, it's about the way people come together, both across oceans and across societies, but also within a society. And I think we've seen people-to-people reconciliation efforts be tremendously effective in this region as well as beyond. And that fundamental reconciliation process is going to have to be part of the long-term peace and the long-term prospects, both for the Sahel, as for elsewhere in Africa, as for in the US and Latin America and everywhere around the world. Fundamentally, the ability to come together after a conflict is one of the most precious and one of the most crucial aspects in any society, and it's one that will need to be reinforced in the Sahel as in many other places.
Karin?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to something you asked about whether Sahelian governments should negotiate with the Islamist groups. And I think, yes, well, it's up to them, right? But one thing that should be worth considering is also to remove the reasons why the opposing party is stronger and has changed the objective conditions of the conflict that is opposing you, to the point where they are under siege, these governments are under siege, and you actually have to sit around a table. What has changed over the last years to a point Mali is in the situation it is right now? So if they actually work on the structural conditions that actually have gone into the favor, have favored Islamist armed groups, and what are those conditions? Civilian harm mitigation mechanisms maybe within the military operations, ensure that civilians have access to justice, and that those who are responsible for grave human rights violations are being held accountable, or that at least authorities show that they are committed to a path towards justice and accountability. Those are some of the structural issues, driving factors of the Islamist recruitment. And if the governments could actually address those, that may, over time, change the dynamics on the ground. Thanks.
Andrea, you have the final word.
Wow. I think that a challenge right now is that there is a lot that the international community could do in terms of security assistance if there were governments that were open for engagement. If we flip the triangle of, we talk about a tip of the sword, if we flipped the triangle upside down, there are endless amounts of press exchanges, meetings and trips where you bring Mali's Defense and Security Committee members over to meet with the US or other European partners' parliamentary committees to strengthen elements of accountability, civilian security oversight. There is so much that could be done that is unfortunately not possible right now, given that door has been slammed closed, and now we are in a very different world. So not to end on I'm going back to Corinne's point about needing to learn from lessons learned in the sub-region, elsewhere on the continent. We need to really focus on getting those lessons out there, because it is very hard to understand, even on a tactical level, because oftentimes these efforts are so out in the field, unreachable by independent observers. So we need to really strengthen these tools of observation, assessment, analysis, but keep them very much in the public realm.
Thank you. It's just difficult to have a conversation on the Sahel in less than an hour. So I want to thank you for for accepting to go through this process with me, with all of us, and thank you to the Atlantic Council and the Institute of the Policy Center, the New South, and then thank you to the audience for staying a little bit 10 minutes above the time with us. But this was a fascinating conversation, but I know we just scratched the surface of a very much more complex and insightful discussion. So with that, join me, if you're online, to thank our panelists, and then and see you next time. I'm sorry, we went 10 minutes. Good, thank you.
This was good.
I hope in the microphone.